He kissed her on stage, right there at the company's annual party, under the spotlight, in front of a room full of employees and investors. The stunned silence was shattered only by gasps as the crowd realized what they'd just witnessed. My husband publicly flaunting his lover, a betrayal so brazen it left no room for denial. My name is Elizabeth Taylor, and I was 56 years old that night in Dallas, Texas. For over 30 years, I dedicated myself to supporting Richard's business and raising our 2 daughters, often putting my own career dreams on hold. We had built a life that on the surface looked enviable. A thriving construction firm, a beautiful home in Highland Park, and a marriage bridging decades of partnership. But beneath the polished facade, cracks had been widening, slow at first, then crashing open in that unforgettable moment. The party was supposed to mark a year of solid growth for Taylor Construction, a celebration of new bids secured and bonds forged in the competitive Texas market. I had dressed in a sleek black velvet dress, hair carefully styled, expecting camaraderie and cheers. Instead, Richard and Monica Davis, his secretary for nearly 5 years, had staged a display of possession in front of everyone. I remember standing near the buffet table, wine glass in hand, frozen as if caught in an invisible snare. The warmth in my chest froze, replaced by an alarming cold I'd never felt before. Monica's laugh, high and triumphant, echoed by Richard's smug smile, felt like a public challenge thrown at my feet. Hurt and humiliation wrestled with disbelief. How long had this been going on? How openly had they been playing me for a fool? I swallowed the urge to confront him then and there, knowing that a scene would ruin the carefully curated reputation my family maintained. Instead, I held my head high, nodded coolly to congratulatory colleagues, and retreated into the shadows of that sprawling ballroom. Later that night, back in our home on Preston Road, I sat on a leather couch, hands trembling as I dialed the number I knew by heart, my mother's. Margaret Wilson was a formidable woman, widowed in her 70s but sharp as a tack, a former CFO for a Fortune 500 company. Her influence had been instrumental in getting Taylor Construction off the ground after Richard's father passed. "Mom," I said, voice low yet resolute, "I need you to withdraw every penny from Richard's business account immediately." Her sigh was soft, but carried steel. "Elizabeth, are you sure? That could tip everything off. I want it done. No questions." That call was the first move in a long game I would play to dismantle the empire Richard had built on lies, and to reclaim my dignity before my whole world collapsed. That night, as I lay awake, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue, I began to plan. Richard thought he had the upper hand, but I knew battles weren't won with passion alone. Winning required precision, patience, and relentless strategy. I was ready to fight, for my family, my legacy, and for the truth that no display of deceit could ever overshadow. The previous output contains the continuation of the story as requested for Part 1. Please let me know if you would like me to continue with Part 2 or any other assistance. The days following the party were a blur of controlled chaos. I moved through the house with deliberate calm, playing the part of the composed wife while a storm brewed behind my eyes. The betrayal had been exposed so publicly that retreat was impossible. Instead, I turned inward, knowing that whatever came next would require calculation, patience, and an unrelenting focus on facts. Emotional outbursts or confrontations would give Richard ammunition and jeopardize the years of painstaking preparation I'd yet to complete. My first order of business was understanding the scope of his deception. Monica Davis, the woman from that night, was not a novelty, but a symptom of a much larger betrayal. Richard's public kiss was a careless flaunt, but behind the scenes there were secrets buried deep in ledgers, contracts, and trust funds. I began by reviewing every financial document I could discreetly access. My mother, Margaret, had been a pillar of support, quick to act when I called that night with my instruction to withdraw every cent. She quietly orchestrated the freezing of accounts and initiated audits within the company's financial records, even before I had gathered the full details. Sitting at my dining room table, armed with sheets of bank statements, internal audit reports, and tax filings, I traced payments that had gone unnoticed during Richard's years at the helm. The construction industry's cash flow was fluid, yet every dollar siphoned for Monica's luxury trips, gifts, and even a downtown Dallas apartment was a thread I followed with precision. There were charges for five-star hotels, expensive dinners at intimate restaurants, and extravagant jewelry purchases, all of which Monica sported openly once news leaked. The company's accounting department, previously cheerful and oblivious, now whispered about irregularities I had uncovered. I recalled the meetings where Richard had assured me his focus was on expanding Taylor Construction's reach, new projects in Austin, improvements at their San Antonio yard. Confident words that masked reckless indulgence, eroding both our marital trust and the company's financial health. But I held the upper hand, meticulous records, legal documents proving my stakes in the business, and my mother's steadfast allegiance. My discreet conversations with Margaret revealed that she had maintained a controlling interest in the company shares since Richard's father's passing. "He's been careless," she said one afternoon across our shared office at her downtown suite, the Texas sun casting long shadows through floor-to-ceiling windows. "He thought your loyalty would blindside both of us. Big mistake." I strategized steps to reassert control. The company's bylaws granted me power far beyond what Richard anticipated. I could convene emergency board meetings, request forensic audits, and freeze accounts at a moment's notice. But all of that required evidence beyond whisperings, proof, and then action. The next move involved Monica Davis herself. I had learned through discreet inquiries and a trusted private investigator that Monica had been present at nearly every corporate launch and event she could attend. Her mansion, lavish and out of place amidst the modest Dallas suburb, had become a staging ground for her influence over Richard. I asked my investigator to monitor her movements, gather communications, and track the flow of corporate perks she'd accumulated. The investigator's reports were damning. Monica accepted gifts outright, funneled money into her personal accounts through shell companies, and operated as an unofficial gatekeeper for clients seeking Richard's favor. I printed every page meticulously, careful to build an airtight case, not through confrontation, but through undeniable documentation. Parallel to the financial and investigative work, I began to rebuild my confidence and presence. I rejoined the board meetings with authority, attending dinners with investors who hadn't realized their capital was being covertly redirected. Their confidence in me, and in my stewardship of the company, was palpable. Richard, in contrast, appeared increasingly isolated. His once commanding presence at the office was fading as whispers circulated about his mismanagement and personal indiscretions. Monica, his shield and trophy, grew distant when the heat of scrutiny intensified. The very woman who had danced on the stage at the company party was now a liability. Throughout it all, I kept my family shielded. Our teenage daughters sensed the tension. I answered their questions carefully, without revealing the full extent. "Dad has work stress," I'd say. "We'll get through it, together." They accepted it for now, but I vowed to preserve their stability no matter what upheavals came. In conversations with my closest friends, I voiced no bitterness, only resolve. "The truth always surfaces," I reminded them, while sipping coffee at a cafe near uptown Dallas. "But you must be ready when it does, for the battle and for the aftermath." One evening, as I reviewed finance statements long after the house had fallen silent, a thought struck me. The power to destroy Richard's empire wasn't in anger or spectacle, it was in silence and precision. The call I made to my mother was more than a cry for help. It was the opening move in a campaign to reclaim my life and dignity. Every secret Monica and Richard believed safe was now another brick in their liability. I held the blueprint to dismantle it silently, efficiently, and irrevocably. The time for playing victim was past. Now it was time to be the architect of my own vindication. And so, with every printed page, every whispered phone call, and every quiet allocation of capital into accounts shielded from Richard's access, I edged closer to the day when I would tear down the facade. The woman kissed on stage by my husband was about to see just how devastating silence could be when wielded by a mother protecting everything she loved. The continuation for Part 2 has been provided as requested, complying with the guidelines for length, style, and originality. If you would like me to proceed with Part 3 or another section, please indicate. As September settled in with the crisp Texas air brushing against trees outside my high-rise office, I realized the gravity of what was unfolding. The public kiss at the company party was a scandal, but it was just the surface of a much deeper betrayal. To unravel Richard's web would take more than anger or confrontation. It needed precision, preparation, and alliances built carefully and silently. I was ready for that challenge. The first step was securing legal counsel who understood both the business and family complexities. I reached out to David Harris, an attorney in Dallas specializing in corporate law and high-net-worth divorces. David's reputation for meticulous case preparation and discretion was exactly what I needed. Our first meeting was in his wood-paneled office overlooking the city skyline, a room smelling faintly of old books and leather. "You're not just fighting a divorce, Elizabeth," David said, reviewing the documents I handed him. "You're dismantling a financial structure your husband thought was unassailable because of legacy and politics. We need to focus on asset protection, latent liabilities, and legal avenues to freeze his control." I felt a surge of relief. For months, I had been gathering evidence: bank statements, transaction histories, corporate bylaws and minutes, unusual cash flows directed to Monica's accounts. But now, there was a tactical blueprint to turn it into action. Meanwhile, Margaret Wilson, my mother, emerged as an essential partner. She had been a silent guardian of the family's legacy since my father's death. When I called her after the party, she mobilized her business contacts immediately. Over the years, she had maintained stronger control over her shares than anyone imagined, ensuring the upstream influence remained within our hands. "We have control, Liz. But it's fragile," she warned during a late-night phone call. "Richard thought he could run the show unchecked, but you have the leverage, shareholder votes, legal documentation, trusteeships. We just have to be smart about activating them." That meant organizing a special shareholders meeting. We drafted a motion to remove Richard from his CEO position, citing breach of fiduciary duty and personal misconduct harming company reputation. Emails circulated discreetly among the executive board and major investors. Not everyone agreed. Some doubted the severity, others feared the fallout. But the bulk recognized the risk Monica posed: a distraction with financial costs that endangered their investments. Parallel to the corporate battle, I fortified my personal financial position. For years, I'd maintained separate retirement accounts and savings, precautionary if marriage faltered, but now I increased contributions and diversified assets. Consulting with a trusted financial planner in Uptown Dallas, I reviewed my 401k, real estate holdings, and the residual trusts from my parents. "You need liquidity and control," she advised. "Stay ahead of Richard's cash flow manipulation." I shifted additional funds into accounts jointly held with my mother, marriages of money and loyalty. The interlocking securities embedded in trusts ensured that any attempt by Richard to funnel out money without shareholder approval would be flagged immediately. It was a web built for defense. At home, I began capturing the emotional terrain. My daughters sensed the strain, and though I kept details light, their school counselor reached out one day privately. Elizabeth asked for time to talk, a quiet, thoughtful child, her forehead creased with adolescent worry. "Mom, things feel different," she confided during a casual dinner. "Dad seems angry, but also distant. And Monica, she smiles too much. It feels like she's not just his secretary." I nodded, brushing her hair back gently. "You're right. It's complicated. But we're strong, and your mom will always protect this family." She sought comfort in normalcy. Football games, sleepovers, high school dances, holds on a world I was trying to preserve even as mine trembled. I promised her, silent and fierce, that I would shield her and her sister from fallout as best as I could. The final pillar of my plan was communication discipline. I curtailed social media, instructed friends and colleagues on discretion, and created layers of plausible deniability. Emails and phone calls were encrypted or encrypted forwarded through lawyers. The public kiss on stage had ignited gossip, leaking into headlines and Twitter feeds. I needed to stem that tide with silence and strategy rather than fueling flames with emotion. I scheduled a key meeting with the executive board at a reserved room in the Dallas Petroleum Club. The turnout was substantial. Many shareholders felt blindsided by the scandal, but acknowledged that decisive action was needed to salvage the company's future. I laid out the documentation meticulously: financial reports, audit findings, timelines of misconduct, and dozens of internal emails hinting at Monica's growing influence over corporate decisions beyond her stated role. "How long do we have?" one board member asked cautiously, eyes darting to the door, mindful of potential leaks. "Not long," I responded firmly. "We strike before the quarterly earnings report, before Monica's name becomes synonymous with scandal beyond our control. We act together, or this company fractures irreparably." Votes were taken quietly but decisively. The resolution passed unanimously to suspend Richard's duties pending review. The legal mechanisms David had prepared were initiated simultaneously to freeze accounts linked to Monica's purchases and Richard's discretional funds. As the dust settled that week, Monica unexpectedly resigned, citing personal reasons. It was no surprise. Her empire of influence crumbled too swiftly for denial. Rumors whispered of her moving out of Dallas altogether to avoid a media storm. Richard found himself isolated, stripped of title and money, confronted not only with public humiliation, but an impending legal battle he had neither prepared nor anticipated. At home, the relief was palpable, but tempered. I tucked my daughters in, whispered prayers of protection, and sat alone with my thoughts. The enemy was still near. Richard fought to maintain control over his life and reputation, but he was running out of pawns and places to hide. I knew the coming months would test every ounce of my strength, but for the first time in years, I had the upper hand. The calculated silence had matured into a weapon, precise and unrelenting. The public kiss was not the beginning, but the catalyst, the moment I transformed from a woman betrayed into a woman reclaiming her power. And I was ready for every battle that lay ahead. October began with a quiet sense of inevitability settling over my life. Though outwardly the world moved in its usual rhythms, Dallas schools opened their doors, markets fluctuated, and football season roared alive. Within the private walls of our home and the closed chambers of corporate boardrooms, a siege was underway. I was no longer merely the betrayed wife, but the architect of a crusade built on years of planning, a woman ready to dismantle carefully what had been constructed on lies. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived with the kind of overcast sky that foreshadows a storm. The Taylor Construction boardroom, high above the Texas cityscape, bore the weight of many decisions, but none as personal as this. As I entered alongside my mother, Margaret, and David Harris, the air was thick with anticipation and unspoken tensions. Richard sat uncomfortably at the table's far end, his usual assured posture faltering under the weight of flashing eyes and whispered conversations. Margaret was calm but steely, her presence commanding respect from the extended family and investors alike. "We're here to discuss serious breaches in fiduciary responsibility," she opened, her voice resonant. "Our investigation into financial statements reveals funds redirected without board approval, personal spending on a company credit card linked directly to Monica Davis, and undisclosed assets. These are unacceptable and threaten the company's survival." David presented next, detailing the legal ramifications. "According to Section 14 of our company charter, the board has the authority to suspend an executive for misconduct subject to a full hearing. Evidence compiled shows Ms. Davis's influence has compromised operational integrity, and Mr. Taylor's decisions have endangered shareholder value. We recommend immediate suspension of Richard Taylor's CEO duties pending a formal investigation." The murmurs rose and fell like waves. Some executives looked pained, others relieved, but the gravity was undeniable. Through meetings that stretched late into the afternoon, votes were cast by shareholders, many influenced by my mother's quiet but persuasive lobbying. In the end, Richard was stripped of his operational powers. Control began shifting toward the directors who supported me and Margaret. After the meeting, I returned home to a silent house, the calm before a storm I already felt approaching. Later that evening, I summoned strength to call my mother once more. "Everything is proceeding," I said, voice steady despite the ache beneath. "It's time to act." Margaret's response was composed but resolute. "I've set up the transfer instructions. Within hours, the accounts will be frozen, and all discretionary funds will be under joint oversight. Your father's legacy will remain, but Richard's reckless spending ends tonight." The following morning, as dawn painted the sky in charcoal and wash of pinks, the transfer of $32 million from Taylor Construction's primary business account began execution. It was a chillingly silent event, unseen by most, except a handful of trusted insiders who processed the electronic authorizations governed by complex corporate hierarchies my mother had mastered decades before. Meanwhile, Richard awoke oblivious to the unraveling. His day began routinely: phone calls checking on contract bids, emails flooding his inbox, meetings planned with Monica to strategize their public image. Yet, as the minutes passed, he received terse messages that paralyzed his confidence. Account frozen pending further notice. Board revoked operational authority. Legal counsel engaged for shareholder dispute. His world, meticulously curated and shielded, shattered with bureaucratic cold precision. Monica attempted to reach him via text and calls, but his phone grew silent until late afternoon when she appeared at his office. Monica's face, once radiant and all-consuming, now held a fragile desperation. "How could she do this?" he demanded, voice hoarse after hours of frantic calls. "My own wife. How is she orchestrating this behind my back?" Monica's reply was biting. "Not your wife anymore, Richard. She's the power behind the throne, and it's time you remembered that." While their fortunes crumbled, I focused on solidifying my newfound control. The recovery meant meeting with tax advisors to assess potential liabilities from Richard's reckless spending, and coordinating with subcontractors and suppliers threatened by halted payments. My mother's legal team prepared defenses against anticipated corporate lawsuits, while David worked aggressively on divorce filings backed by overwhelming documentation of misconduct. I also understood this battle wasn't just about money or status. Richard's pride was wounded deeply. He once wielded influence effortlessly. Now he scrambled to maintain a semblance of power. I braced myself for his inevitable confrontations, knowing that his tactics might include attempts to isolate me socially or to sway mutual acquaintances to his side. Amid the turmoil, I preserved a semblance of normalcy at home. Our daughters, now in their 20s, watched with wary relief as the dynamics shifted without open family drama. I held private conversations with them, explaining only what was necessary to shield them from legal minutiae, while reinforcing the message that their mother was fighting for the integrity of the family name and future. One evening, alone in my study, I pored over fractured memories of the man Richard once was. A husband who'd once whispered promises under the wide Texas sky, who'd held our daughters' hands on first days of school, who'd dreamed aloud of building an enterprise that would outlast us all. The weight of betrayal sliced sharply against the remnants of love I struggled to reconcile. Yet the path forward was clear. I would not fall victim to his mistakes. I envisioned a future where integrity, not deception, defined us, where I directed the legacy my parents, those tough, relentless Texans, had fought to establish. Late in October, the company press release announced Richard's suspension, citing concerns over fiduciary responsibility and a commitment to restoring investor confidence. The stock price dipped, investors scrutinized fiscal reports, and Monica vanished from public view, rumors swirling about her abrupt departure from Dallas. Richard, isolated and stripped, finally confronted me atop our home's broad staircase one chilly November evening. His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You think you've won, Elizabeth?" he snarled. "You'll regret this. Without me, this company means nothing." I met his gaze calmly, the years of preparation igniting my voice with steady resolve. "This company has always meant more than you. It's family, and family doesn't thrive on betrayal." He recoiled as if struck. The space between us was no longer just physical, but symbolic, a chasm created by shattered trust and decisions now irrevocable. In the depths of that confrontation, I realized the truth of my journey. Despite the pain endured and battles fought, I had emerged not a victim, but a guardian, one who would fiercely protect her family, reputation, and legacy without apology. And as the Texas night closed around me, I felt a fierce, rising hope that this was not just the end of a marriage or the fall of a man, but the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write on my own terms. The weeks that followed Richard's suspension were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, silent betrayals, and public whispers. The once unshakable figure I had married was unraveling publicly, piece by piece, a man undone not by scandal alone, but by the strategic precision of a wife who refused to be sidelined. The company, once Richard's kingdom, became my battleground, a place where I fought not just for financial control but for justice and dignity. The divorce proceedings commenced swiftly, filed by David with a meticulous portfolio of evidence, financial documents, audit reports, witness affidavits, and records of Richard's extramarital indiscretions. Monica's abrupt resignation and disappearance weakened Richard's position further. Rumors swirled in Dallas social circles, but I remained focused, never driven by vengeance, but by a measured insistence that truth and fairness would prevail. In court, Richard's defense faltered under the weight of proof. His attorneys attempted to portray Monica as an innocent, his actions as lapses in judgment rather than calculated betrayal. But the narrative couldn't hold. The judge acknowledged the financial betrayal and its impact on other shareholders, noting the significant role Elizabeth played in preserving the company's integrity. One afternoon, facing the reality of his crumbling empire and public disgrace, Richard requested a private conversation. We met at the neutral grounds of a local cafe, under the muted light of autumn's waning days. He appeared weary, eyes distant, smile strained. "Elizabeth," he began hesitantly, "I never imagined it would come to this." His voice was unsteady, the arrogance replaced by a flicker of regret. I thought you would forgive. I thought my mistakes could be swept away." I studied him closely, weighing the man who sat before me against years of silence and deceit. "Richard," I said quietly, "this isn't about forgiveness. It's about accountability. We built a life and a company together, but that foundation was undermined by choices you made, without regard for anyone but yourself." He nodded slowly. "I have to live with that. But you've been stronger than I ever gave you credit for." The conversation ended with no closure, only the stark recognition that our paths, once intertwined, were now irrevocably separate. Back in the courtroom, the final hearing brought tears for the betrayal, the broken promises, but also for resilience. The judge awarded me full custody of the family's remaining assets and sole ownership of a newly formed charitable foundation dedicated to empowering women entrepreneurs. This, the judge stated, was a testament to Elizabeth Taylor's unwavering commitment to integrity and justice in the face of personal adversity. Richard's reputation was shattered, the public trial a permanent stain on his legacy. Monica's absence was palpable, her fall from societal grace swift and absolute. The company, buoyed by new leadership loyal to the principles I upheld, began a slow recovery, a phoenix rising from ashes of trust betrayed. At home, the victory was bittersweet. My daughters, now young women with their own lives unfolding, embraced the future with tentative optimism. I guided them through the complicated emotions, the shame, confusion, and eventual acceptance that came with redefining family on our terms. One evening, sitting by the fireplace with a soft breeze drifting through open windows, I reflected on the journey. This battle had been more than financial or legal. It was a fight for respect, for dignity, for the truth. It was a reminder that strength isn't always loud or violent, but often quiet, sustained by unwavering principles and the courage to act. I realized that the kiss on that ill-fated stage was not just a public humiliation, but a catalyst, a moment that forced me to reclaim not only a company, but my own identity, my voice, and my power. For every scar left on my heart, there was a lesson etched deep, a resilience forged anew. Though the past wounds remained, they did not define me. Instead, they shaped a woman who could hold her head high, knowing she had fought and won the justice she and her family deserved. And in that victory, I found peace. The quiet that settled after the storm was nothing more than a delicate truce. The public spectacle had faded into the background noise of Dallas's endless hustle, but inside, the reverberations still shaped each breath I took. I sat alone in my study, the night deep around me, a glass of untouched wine warming in my hand as memories cascaded through years lived in shadows and light. For a long time, defeating Richard felt like survival, the sheer act of reclaiming control against a betrayal so conspicuous it could not be ignored. But survival is only the first step. What follows is the reconstruction, the painstaking restoration of identity and purpose after a life once shared fractures into fragments scattered by deceit. Margaret, my mother, always told me that true power lay in restraint and wisdom. That strength was not the roar of rebellion, but the quiet courage to build anew. Her voice echoed again as I arranged files of the company's new foundation, a legacy founded on women's empowerment and ethical leadership. I had transformed suppression into opportunity, not just for myself, but for countless others who faced the subtle violence of betrayal. My daughters flourished in ways shaped by resilience. We spoke often about dignity, about the importance not of perfection, but of fairness and self-respect. They wore no scars of their father's indiscretions. Instead, they carried lessons of perseverance etched into their very beings. Elizabeth was preparing for college in Austin. Catherine had started her own small business founded on sustainable design principles. Both found in our family's upheaval the impetus to define themselves beyond old shadows. In the months following the legal battles, I found my own voice again, this time beyond the confines of boardrooms and courtrooms. I spoke at women's business forums, sharing my journey not as a tale of vengeance, but as testimony to the power of strategic patience and unyielding self-worth. I mentored aspiring entrepreneurs, emphasizing that dignity must never hinge on the flimsiness of others' loyalty or mistakes. The mansion we once shared still stood, but the laughter that had filled its halls was replaced by a quiet determination. I downsized for practicality, choosing a smaller home near downtown Dallas, where mornings greeted me with the hum of the city and evenings were silent reprieves. My days were no longer dictated by financial power struggles. Instead, they were shaped by service and community, helping other women navigate broken promises and rebuild lives. Some nights, when the silence grows too thick, I sit on the porch with a leather-bound journal, pen in hand, reminding myself of the woman I have become. The survivor, the strategist, the mother, the daughter of resilience. There are moments when old grief surfaces, the sting of betrayal still fresh beneath the scar tissue. Those moments remind me that healing is never a straight path. It is a spiral of setbacks and growth, pain and triumph intertwined. Richard's presence has dimmed to a footnote in the ledger of my life. His fall from grace was swift but inevitable. And while public opinion eventually turned, I refused to waste energy on bitterness. Instead, I chose to channel my rage into building a future where respect and integrity guide decisions. I learned that justice need not be loud. Sometimes it is the steady pulse beneath quiet strength. Looking back, I see the kiss on that stage for what it truly was. A challenge thrown in my path. A test I passed not by force, but by patience, intellect, and unwavering belief in my own worth. I hadn't just survived his betrayal. I had used it as a catalyst to reclaim myself, redefine my family, and solidify a legacy rooted in truth. And so, as the Texan stars wink cold and clear above, I close this chapter not with regret, but with gratitude. The wounds have become wisdom, the fractures, foundations. I stand not as a woman broken by infidelity, but as one forged stronger by it, ready to face whatever winds come next with courage and an unshakable sense of self. In the end, it is not the fall that defines us, it is the rise.